Well, my name is Adam Atkinson.
And I'm Everett Hoffman.
Yeah.
And this is our studio, and it's in the Barns, which is the resident artist studio space at the Penland School of Craft.
Yeah. We both studied metalsmithing and art jewelry at Boise State University as undergrads. And we studied under Annika Smolovitz, who is an incredible artist, and she was definitely a big influence, I think.
Yeah, and then I think we both kind of came to metals at different times, even though we were both in undergrad at the same time and studied. I gotten in a metals class by accident because I needed to fill a credit, and then that kind of first day of seeing how you can cut metal and heat it up, I immediately kind of fell in love with it. Originally was going to be a painter, and then kind of fell into metals. So my current body of work is kind of a exploration of existing materials that I then repurpose to kind of create what I call a queer hybrid object. And most recently I've been making a lot of cups, athletic support cups and jock straps made out of materials that you would kind of find every day, from baseballs to needle points to doilies, and that has metalwork kind of mixed in with it, and then along those kind of lines, and making kind of more sculptural work, I also do make jewelry, and using kind of vintage rhinestones, things that I can find on eBay or at thrift stores, to create kind of jewelry that reimagines kind of the traditional costume jewelry. I prefer to kind of term interdisciplinary artist. Sometimes I'll go with the object maker, because primarily what I'm making, even if it's not in metals, is kind of some sort of functional object, even if it's not readily apparent to the viewer. And so I like that ambiguous term. I like to have a little bit of ambiguity.
Yeah, I also kind of consider myself more of an object maker, or just an artist in general, I guess. My practice is really based on materiality and those kinds of investigations, and so sometimes I'm obviously really interested in experimenting with adornment and jewelry, but I also think that it's interesting to work with space and artworks which are at a larger scale, and kind of trying to find a link between them, and to see how they might influence each other. So I'll make sculptures and then jewelry simultaneously, almost as part of the same series, and aesthetically very similar, but not obviously always functional.
Yeah, well, and then you can take those ideas and kind of transfer them, jewelry, and the idea of adornment, taking that as an idea that you can use in sculpture, and installations, is something that I find really interesting, because it's something that you can take and kind of manipulate into different forms, and so it can be kind of unexpected for people to see things that are set with rhinestones in a sculpture, or in an installation.
Yeah. I guess my current body of work is kind of an evolution on some of the themes that I've been working with for the last couple of years, having to do with nature, identity, and a large part of my research is focused on manifest destiny and the movement west in the 19th century. And so I use a lot of animal hides and metal, and I kind of combine them together to create wearable, kind of abstracted taxidermy forms. And that has evolved into a combination of other materials, including wood and metal. So I'm still kind of working with those themes and discovering different ways to communicate something about identity and nature, and the way that we're shaped by our environment.
Your work being very interdisciplinary, when do you choose to follow making traditions, and when do you choose to experiment?
That's a good question. question.
Yeah.
I'm stumped.
I'm always open to doing something new and different. I'm always like want to see just like what will happen to like, and so like I'm never really set on kind of the like historical kind of techniques that I need to learn or need to focus on. I'm more interested in like what the metal can do or what the rhinestones can do, or what happens when you combine multiple things. I think that can lend itself to like a lot of really interesting developments within the work.
Yeah, I think that I work a little bit more traditionally, perhaps than Everett does. I spend a lot of time sort of rooting myself in traditional techniques. I use a lot of chasing and repoussé, which is like forming metal from the front and back to create sort of these like organic abstract forms. But then I don't know, I'm really interested in the way that the historical, I guess, viewpoint or aesthetics of traditional processes adds a lot of beauty to an object. And then it allows me to sort of invite the viewer in to take a closer look, and then they can sort of analyze the narrative that I'm trying to portray. So it's kind of like a lure, I guess, the traditional techniques, and then I combine other elements for their, I guess, material histories. The forms can be beautiful, and they can also be jarring and a little repulsive at the same time. I'm really interested in that sort of aesthetic, like repelling and attracting at the same time, to get people to sort of question what they think is beautiful or what they think is valuable, I guess, in jewelry work. So I use chasing tools, which are these, they're basically just pieces of tool steel that I make myself. I form them and shape them and harden them and polish them. And so they each have sort of a different purpose. Like this one is an embossing tool, which I use for general shaping. And then I've got like some of these flatter, shinier surfaces that I use for planishing, which is to kind of like, it smooths out the metal and it gives it a shiny finish at the same time. So, and there's a lot of other tools in here too, like this is one of my favorite texturing tools. I just kind of carved into the surface of that with some files and then polished it, and it gives a really great sort of like grainy texture. Mm-hmm. So that's probably one of my favorite tools and definitely needed for the process. Can't really do chasing and repoussé without it.
Mm-hmm. So one of the pieces that will be in the show is this cup that is made out of, it's been formed out of stainless steel and then been set with vintage rhinestones. And so this was based off of an athletic cup that I came across from the 1950s. And so I took a sheet of steel, formed it into shape, and then pierced out the negative space and set it with rhinestones. And so these rhinestones, the pattern is based off of the kind of floral patterns of rhinestone brooches. And then it actually does fit into a cup, and then you can wear it as like a physical cup if you so please. And then part of my work is, taking things that exist and turning them into something new. And so then when it's not worn on the body, it gets put on the wall and becomes a nightlight. And so that's one of the pieces that is going to be in the show. And then along those same lines, I have a couple of pieces of jewelry that are in the show. And so this is a brooch that is made from vintage rhinestones and then anodized titanium. And so this is where I took the titanium and then set the rhinestones. And this is all set using what's called cold connections. And so this is a traditional setting that they would use for costume jewelry because it's made so quickly and cheaply. You don't want to have to heat up the metal to solder anything on it. And so these are all kind of what's called tab set. So it's cut out and then the metal is just formed over the stones, trapping them in. And then the brooches, which you might not be able to see, usually have like a little surprise on the back. And that's one of the nice things about jewelry is it's a three-dimensional object, and so the back should be just as adorned as the front. So I made these works all along the same time, kind of thinking about this idea of costume jewelry and rhinestones and what kind of possibility that they have to adorn the body. And so this is some of the work that's going to be in the show that I'm pretty excited about.
So is teaching part of your practice?
Oh yeah, definitely. I teach, I'm teaching online right now at Virginia Commonwealth University in the Art Foundations Department, and I am also teaching at Boise State University over the summer for an online beginning jewelry class. So I've discovered a lot from teaching that. Like it has sort of influenced my own practice and the way that I'm thinking about things, because the challenge is that students have to be able to work at home alone without me there, and we meet via Zoom. So I've had to totally rethink how a beginning jewelry class could function, and it's in turn kind of forced me to think of new ways of combining metal materials. So yeah, I think so for me.
Yeah, and I mean, I teach as well, predominantly like doing workshops at places like Penland or different craft schools. And that has like a different feel to it because it's a lot of people coming to metals later on in life. And so it's really exciting to see somebody come to metals or come to like a certain technique that they're wanting to learn for the first time and then take that and like kind of run with it. And so I really enjoy the kind of back and forth that I have with students. It's usually a shorter class frame between, maybe like 2 weeks to like sometimes there's like a 6-week session. But it allows us to kind of bounce ideas back and forth and to kind of really explore like what metals can be. So, and then one of the things that Adam and I have done also is done queer workshops for high school students in metals. And so a lot of people, when they come to art school or when they come to college, they might not know that there's this opportunity to do metals, or they might not be able to think that they would be able to do that. And so kind of reaching out to people, when they're in high school or younger and showing them, everybody, can work in metals. Metals doesn't have to be this, hammering all day long, very physical thing. It can be something, it can be really what you make it to be.
Yeah, for sure. I think, like Everett was saying, it's really important to sort of harbor those communities and to make a real effort, I think. I don't know that that the metals field has any one particular demographic, but I think that it's a field which has a deep history that crosses cultures and time periods all across the world. And I think that there's room for anybody to participate that wants to.
Yeah, and I guess I would think the person who kind of is gravitated towards metal is somebody who can deal with a lot of like frustration and problem solving. I think like metal can be like an eternally difficult material to work with, and it's really stubborn and can be really frustrating, and you can have a lot of breakdowns. Yeah. And so like I think that it maybe attracts those type of people who are like very stubborn and like very much going to be like, I'm going to make this work. I'd also say a little bit more of like introverts, because of the nature of how kind of specific types of like, jewelry at least works. It can be kind of an isolating material to work with because you're working at your bench. You're not in a community where you would be if you're glass blowing or maybe even doing ceramics. And so maybe a more introverted type of person.
Yeah, for sure.
Both of you have ties to Virginia Commonwealth University. One is an instructor, one is a student. Mm-hmm. Now, what is it about Virginia Commonwealth that attracted you to that institution?
So I went to VC for grad school in the Craft and Material Studies department, and I, went to VC specifically because the department was interdisciplinary. So on the floor, you are working with a glass blower, or working with somebody who's working in fibers, or working with somebody who's in clay. And so my degree isn't, my MFA isn't as in metals, it's in craft and material studies. And so it was this kind of broad range of like exploration. And so that's what really drew me to the program, and I think really helped me to kind of find my voice in kind of the interdisciplinary work that I'm making.
Yeah. The caliber of work that students make there makes it really rewarding for me as an instructor. I've had some of the best students I've ever had teaching at VCU. But also I think the thing that makes it so interesting and that's so rewarding for the students and myself is that they can work in such a wide variety of areas, especially for the undergrads, because they can take any classes that they want in any of the 5 different areas that they have there. And so they end up combining them in really interesting and unusual ways, which I think kind of speaks to sort of the movement of the metals field, I think.